The Sarah Jane Adventures, The Time Capsule, by Peter Anghelides. Read by Elisabeth Sladen. Appearances can be deceptive. You might imagine adventures always begin in the strangest and wildest places. And believe me, I've seen those places. I've travelled across the galaxy to the glittering arcades of Peldragticon, where the roofs are alive with a million dancing lights on luminous butterflies' wings. I've haggled with Barnubian traders on the crest of Ruby Aurealis, whose currency is a living organism, and where merchants must refuse a buyer's offer on 3 occasions before they bow deeply and graciously accept. I even attended an auction in Shambra Soldera, where I raised a hand to make a bid and didn't realise that I'd volunteered myself as one of the lots. Fortunately, the friend I travelled with managed to buy me back on that occasion. He would take everything comfortably in his long stride. But for me, every new experience was fresh and surprising. At first, when I returned home to Earth, I worried if I would ever settle again, if I ever could, until I found there were wonderful things right here on my home planet, things every bit as moving and exciting and dangerous and amazing as anything I ever saw out there in the universe. So I also know adventures can begin in the most ordinary of circumstances. Even so, I was surprised this one started when I was, of all things, doing my weekly shopping. Because, to be honest, after Ruby Aurealis, you sort of expect that a trip to my local Betterworth supermarket will be a bit of a disappointment. I hate all that hustle and bustle. Paying £1 for a trolley with a wonky wheel and a mind of its own. The mad rush around the cavernous interior of the supermarket. The way you have to rifle through shelves to find the right brand of washing powder or ripe bananas or an unsqueezed loaf. Fending off those demonstrators who tried to make people stop and sample some overpriced new dip, but just end up blocking the whole aisle. And after everything, you choose the wrong checkout queue and spend a lifetime waiting to pay. This time, though, I noticed one of the supermarket staff acting suspiciously. You could tell he worked in the store from his nasty, brightly patterned Betterworth shirt. Yet he wasn't bustling around carrying boxes or directing shoppers or straightening produce on the shelves. He was following someone around the store, advancing in short, sharp bursts between the aisles, then hanging back to hide from whoever or whatever he was pursuing. He tried to stay concealed behind a tottering display of foil-wrapped Easter eggs. His head darted from side to side. He looked like a cat measuring the distance before pouncing on a mouse. When I approached him, he seemed engrossed in studying his wristwatch. I tapped his shoulder. "Excuse me," I said, ready to pretend I was asking where to find the fresh meat counter. "Can you direct me to—" "Oh, it's you, Clyde." Clyde is a 15-year-old school friend of my son, Luke. Best friend, really. I sometimes think Luke's learned as much from Clyde as he has from school. I was surprised to see Clyde, but not half as surprised as he was to see me. "Oh, hi, Sarah Jane," he said with exaggerated cheerfulness, masking his astonishment badly. He skirted back around the corner and into the fruit and veg aisle. In an obvious attempt to look unflustered, he pointed at the contents of my shopping trolley. "Broccoli? Ooh! You don't make Luke eat that stuff, do you? It's gross. Remind me to check the menu before I come round next week." "Don't worry," I said. "It'll be burger and chips as usual. No lettuce, no tomato, no mayo. I haven't forgotten that you're a meatarian." He wasn't really listening. He was keeping track of his previous pursuit. From his sigh and the way he slumped his shoulders, I could tell he'd lost sight of it. "Clyde, what are you doing?" He shuffled his feet in embarrassment. "Work experience." "That wasn't what I meant," I told him. "But wait a minute. I thought Luke said you were doing your work experience in sales." This week, each pupil in their whole class year had to find 5 days of employment with a local business as part of their Readiness for the Workplace course. They were in garages or solicitors or hairdressers or libraries or wherever, getting a flavour of what it was like to work 9 to 5. "Luke gave me the impression that you were working in the head office of a plumbing firm." Clyde couldn't hide the beginnings of a cheeky grin. "Gave you the impression? Yeah," he admitted. "Oh, I see," I smiled. "My Luke never tells a lie. Makes him unusual for a 14-year-old boy. No more unusual than many other aspects of our lives, I suppose. But he's a smart boy, smart enough to know that not telling the whole truth isn't quite the same as telling a lie." He'd obviously not told me everything about Clyde's work placement to spare his friend's embarrassment. Clyde shrugged. When I put retail on the application form, I thought, a clothes shop with some cred or computer game store in the arcade, that'd have been sweet. And miss out on that uniform, I teased him. Yeah, he said, with a sarcastic gesture at his horrible Betterworth shirt. Nylon is so coming back. You should see the emo kid on the wet fish counter. Looks like he wants to throw himself into the freezer and die. He looked in my trolley again. Adopting an overpolite accent, he asked, "Can I be of assistance, madam?" That's how Cheesy Charleston says we should talk to customers. He's my boss. Are you enjoying today's shopping experience? No, I never do. There's always something to annoy me or someone pestering me with special offers. I don't want to stand chatting to pretty young strangers who grab my elbow and wave appetizing morsels at me on cocktail sticks. I held up the sample I'd reluctantly accepted in a previous aisle. Some of them are well tasty, said Clyde, taking it off me greedily. The appetizing morsels, I mean. Well, I told him, I'd prefer to get in, get my stuff, and get home. So I usually leave the shopping to Luke. I know you'll think that's odd for a 14-year-old boy to enjoy grocery shopping, but he's not like most 14-year-olds. He has the entire shopping list off pat, works out the most efficient route around the supermarket, and then, before the last item has pipped its barcode at the till, he's already calculated what the total cost will be. His friends tease him about it. I think it's because they envy him his memory and his organisation. At least, I hope that's why. They're nice enough kids, Clyde and Rani. They may not share Luke's phenomenal memory, but they've shared enough adventures to know how important it is. Yeah, we call him Cool Bag Luke, grinned Clyde. He even does shopping for one of your neighbours. Mr. Ploughman, I scowled. That pensioner from 3 doors down. He persuaded Luke to help out. Well, I say persuaded. I really mean conned him. I've seen Mr. Ploughman down on his allotment, and if he can wield a spade like that, well, I'm sure he can carry a couple of plastic shopping bags back from Betterworth. But then you see him hobbling down Bannerman Road on that stick with his pebble-thick glasses. I could swear that war wound gets worse when he thinks he's been spotted. So are you doing Mr. Ploughman's shopping while Luke's at the museum? I narrowed my eyes at Clyde. You have got to be kidding. Anyway, we've seen neither hide nor hair of Mr. Ploughman for, a couple of weeks. He was asking everyone in the road to complain about some new building work they were doing on wasteland behind his house. I told him I was busy. Haven't seen him since. Clyde was suddenly distracted by something. His wristwatch was making a buzzing noise. I knew he was very proud of that watch. It was a birthday present from his mum, full of buttons and dials and numbers. When I'd first seen it, I wasn't sure whether you were supposed to tell the time with it or use it to teleport to the moon. When it broke after only a week, Clyde had been hugely disappointed, and I'd used my sonic lipstick to repair it for him. After that, the watch never wound down. Luke was so impressed, he asked me to do the same with his wristwatch too. I looked at Clyde's watch now. The needles on every dial were spinning frantically. It's doing it again, Clyde gasped. He turned round, angling his arm ahead of him to see what effect it had on the watch. The whizzing sound was already dying away. Clyde scuttled off down the shopping aisle, darting his head from side to side again. He must be nearby. A man in a suit gripped Clyde's outstretched wrist. "Ah, Clyde," he said. His voice was languid and affected. He released Clyde's arm and began to tap his shoulder blade with a pointing finger. "Is it you or one of your little friends who piled the tins of dog food in aisle 5? "No, Mr. Cheeseman," muttered Clyde. "I mean, Mr. Charleston." "No matter," continued Charleston relentlessly, barely listening to Clyde. "This is a supermarket, not an art gallery. You get across to aisle 5, dismantle that little sculpture, and put all those tins back on the shelves where they belong. The area manager is visiting today." The poking finger emphasised each phrase. "Don't you want your work experience to teach you anything?" The imperious Mr. Charleston couldn't be more than 4 or 5 years older than Clyde, but with his slicked-back hair and first good suit, he already had the pomposity of a man more than twice his age. A little twist of tissue paper beneath his chin suggested he hadn't got the hang of shaving yet. Charleston wasn't attempting to make eye contact. It was like he was speaking for the benefit of everyone who overheard him, and not to Clyde as a person. Charleston spotted the cocktail stick and plucked it from Clyde's fingers. "I told you before, the sample food is for the customers." "But she offered," protested Clyde. "She offers everyone," sneered Charleston. "She probably feels sorry for you. You shouldn't accept it." Clyde said no, Mr. Charleston, and yes, Mr. Charleston, as the exchange continued, but I could see from Clyde's eyes that a different conversation was going on in his head. I recognised that look from when he talked to me sometimes, cheeky lad. I smiled broadly at Clyde as I approached them along the aisle. Charlson was saying, "Don't be like that dreary girl Jennifer on the cheese counter who can't tell her Roquefort from her Camembert, and worse, doesn't seem to care." I interrupted him, pulling his pointing finger away from Clyde's shoulders. Otherwise, I ignored Charlson. "Oh, there you are again." "Clyde," I said, peering at his badge as though working out his name for the first time. "You were so very helpful before, making sure that I'm enjoying today's shopping experience. Could you show me to the cheese counter?" "I'd be glad to assist you, madam," interrupted Charlson. He rubbed his hands together as though washing his hands with invisible soap. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "We'll be fine," I said brusquely, and escorted Clyde away in a chorus of further thanks. "He's a pain," I told Clyde. "Yeah," he agreed. "You know what I've learnt from my work experience? That the store manager cares more about pet food than he cares about people. It's all, clear that pallet, and a time to lean is a time to clean, and bing bong, clear up on aisle 7. "Never mind that," I said to him. "What's going on with your watch? It looked like some powerful interference field, possibly temporal, probably telekinetic." "I think it's this old bloke I've been following around the place," said Clyde. "He was acting all odd-like when I got close to him." Clyde abruptly pulled us against a nearby shelf. I could smell the soapy contents of washing powder boxes by my head. "There he is," hissed Clyde. He pointed at a shabby old man in a pale raincoat. The material was faded and dirty, and his hair was grey and unkempt. The man walked upright without a walking stick, and he wasn't wearing his pebble spectacles, but I knew at once that it was my grumpy neighbour, Mr. Ploughman. He was frowning at a pocket calculator in his hand. He passed the end of the laundry aisle, and the dials on Clyde's watch whizzed furiously. I could hear another noise too. It was coming from my handbag. What a time to get a phone call! But it wasn't my mobile. It was my sonic lipstick, rattling and buzzing like a maddened wasp trying to escape a jam jar. Mr. Ploughman put away his calculator and pulled out thick black-rimmed spectacles from the pocket of his grubby raincoat. He peered owlishly through the lenses as though he wasn't used to wearing them. When he walked into the next aisle, there was no evidence of any limp, no trace of his usual shuffling gait. "I knew it," I snapped emphatically. "War wound, indeed. He just puts it on." I'd spoken too loudly. Mr. Ploughman pulled off his glasses and glared down the laundry aisle straight at us. "Uh-oh," said Clyde. Mr. Ploughman's head jerked up like a startled horse. It was obvious that he recognised me. He strode smartly out of the aisle. In his haste, he almost catapulted himself headlong over a shopping trolley. It shoved painfully against the matronly woman who was steering it erratically past the bottled water. She made an oof sound as the trolley struck her in the midriff. Mr. Ploughman kept his balance but dropped his glasses. From his frantic look, I could tell he couldn't see where they'd fallen. He hesitated. The matronly woman got her breath back and berated him for his carelessness. Mr. Ploughman could see I was already halfway down the aisle. He turned on his heel and fled. Clyde haired off after him. "What does he think he's doing?" bristled the woman with the trolley. "I shall have the management on him." I needed to find out what had happened to Mr. Ploughman and didn't want Betterworth staff involved, so I said to the unhappy woman, "I am so sorry about my, uncle. He's not entirely there." I tapped my own temple and gave her a shamelessly helpless smile of appeal. The woman shuddered visibly. "Very well," she said, and seemed to calm a little. I was about to hurry off when she continued, "Well, he should watch where he's going," and put a hand on my arm. "Perhaps he should keep these on." She retrieved Mr. Ploughman's glasses from her trolley where they'd fallen in the middle of her shopping. I thanked the woman and accepted them. Strange, I thought. The frames were familiar, but the lenses were not the thick magnifying glasses I remembered. They were more like plain glass. Iridescent colours swirled over the surface like a thin film of oil on water. "Oh, what?" Clyde's cry of disbelief was audible from the next aisle. I caught up with him in the dairy section. He gaped at the chaos before him. Wheel cages filled with cartons of milk blocked the whole aisle. "How could that old guy get through this lot?" asked Clyde. Maybe they were already out and he pulled one behind him. I seized the nearest cage. "Come on, he's getting away." Clyde almost caught him at the corner, but Ploughman scooted around it. I expected to see him right in front of us as we scrambled into the adjacent aisle. Instead, there was a wall of cans. Baked beans in shrink-wrapped 4-packs that blocked further progress. Clyde slithered into it, but the wall held firm. Mr. Ploughman was running off beyond further stacked cans, tin tomatoes this time. The improvised barriers had appeared from nowhere. Trapped between them was the free samples woman. She stared in bemusement at her makeshift prison, nervous fingers still feebly waving a couple of food samples on cocktail sticks at the people enclosed with her. "He's heading for the frozen food!" yelled Clyde, and we chased through the cereal aisle. At the far end, Mr. Ploughman glanced up and saw us. He prodded at his pocket calculator. Clyde and I had barely darted into the aisle before there was a rustling noise from the shelves. Loaves of bread flew off the shelves. They dropped rapidly to the floor to form a tottering barrier, head height in front of us. "No problem," decided Clyde, and shouldered his way through the bread barricade. Wholemeal, stone ground and medium-sliced white tumbled around us. We chased after Ploughman, panting our way past the furious Mr. Charlson. "Clean up in aisle 12!" he bellowed to whoever he thought was listening to him. Clyde caught up with Mr. Ploughman in the frozen food section. Clyde grabbed his shoulder, but the old man was surprisingly sprightly and shook Clyde off easily. Mr. Ploughman clambered up onto the edge of the freezer unit before walking along it like a weird tightrope walker. Astonished shoppers moved away from the spectacle, amazed and amused and alarmed in turn. No man of that age could have disguised such agility. This was something more than a pensioner dancing his way along the cabinet of frozen chickens. Mr. Ploughman pressed more buttons on his calculator. White light flared from deep within the freezer. Random selections of food sprang up and slammed against the opposite cabinets. Shoppers ducked for cover as frozen poultry bounced like rocks all around them. Clyde dodged a joint of pork as it zoomed past his head. He seized Ploughman's legs. Ploughman roared with rage and wrestled to free himself, prizing Clyde's hands from his shins. In the struggle, he released his calculator device and it rattled to the tiled shop floor. Just as he loosened Clyde's grip, the old man stumbled and fell from his precarious position onto the tiles. The effort destabilised Clyde, who lurched forward, overbalanced, and tipped into the cabinet. I hurried forward to help Clyde out of the cold interior before he froze. But when I reached the cabinet, I reeled in amazement. The cabinet was an icy void, stretching well below the floor of the shop. Clyde seemed impossibly far away, his horrid Betterworth shirt a speck of colour in the white void. Beside me, Ploughman snarled with rage. For a moment, I feared he would attack me. Instead, I saw that he was thrashing in the grip of 2 store security guards. Mr. Charlson was shouting, "That's quite enough, sir. Just leave now and we'll say no more about it. No need for us to press charges." "Never mind him," I yelled. "Get Clyde out of that freezer." Charlson jerked his head at the security guards. "Escort the old man outside. I'll reprimand that stupid lad later." The guards seized Ploughman's awful raincoat and dragged him away. "No!" I shouted and grabbed Charlson's arm. "You, help me get Clyde out of there." Charlson removed my hand and looked at me through narrowed eyes. "He'll need saving when I get hold of him." No cheesy grin for me now, I noticed. I clearly wasn't his favourite customer anymore. I had no time to argue. I was terrified that Clyde was trapped in an icy grave. I clutched the side of the freezer cabinet and wondered whether I could clamber down into its depths. But there was Clyde, standing waist-high in the cabinet, apparently unaffected by the cold. The fierce light around him slowly died down. "Clyde!" I shouted and leaned in to help him. Charlson eased me aside. "What were you thinking?" he snapped at Clyde. "Assaulting a pensioner! We'll be lucky if that old geezer doesn't sue us. And on the day that the area manager is visiting too." His face was suffused with anger, veins bulging in his badly shaved neck. "You'll have to discard all that food, sterilise that cabinet. In fact, you'll be lucky to get home before midnight." Clyde's face was eerily calm. He stepped easily from the cabinet and walked away in silence. Icy water dripped from his Betterworth shirt and left a wet trail down the aisle. He stepped right past me, like he didn't recognise me. Charlson confronted him. "Where are you going, you stupid lad?" Clyde said nothing. He raised his hand, and I saw that it held a cube-shaped object like a large dice. He must have retrieved it from the cabinet, but it wasn't food. The markings were alien. A sharp, bright flash of light hurled Mr. Charlson backwards into a display cabinet of dairy produce. He slumped to the tiled supermarket floor in a daze, and the display's contents cascaded around him. Yogurts, packs of butter, and a complete shelf of pre-packed processed cheese. I hurried behind Clyde. "Please stop," I begged. "You might be hurt, and that shirt's sopping wet, Clyde." "Clyde!" He raised the cube-shaped device again, and I shrank back involuntarily. Just as well. The aisle through which Clyde was walking simply erupted. My first instinct was that there had been an explosion, but there was no smoke or flame, just the percussive noise of boxes and plastic packages bursting apart. Cardboard containers scattered in his wake. The box top snapped open, and with a crackling popping sound, their contents sprayed out. Shoppers shrieked as cornflakes and oatmeal and crisped rice whirled into the air and coalesced into the shape of a huge humanoid. Their head blinked down at them with raisin eyes. People dived aside, and Clyde continued unimpeded, his brisk walk taking him like a zombie through the maelstrom and towards the checkouts. I chased after him undeterred. The cereal monster swatted at me with a huge arm. I raised my own to fend off a spray of cereal bits. Because I was still holding Mr. Plowman's spectacles in my raised hand, I saw that the bizarre monster was encircled with ghostly tendrils. They were like strings animating a monstrous marionette. The tendrils twitched. One enormous hand reached out, wrapped itself around me, and squeezed. I gasped in anticipation of the breath being crushed from my lungs, but the foodstuff had no substance, and cornflakes and muesli just scattered around me. I jammed the spectacles onto my face to keep both hands free, and seized a stiff broom from the household products aisle. I lashed out at the amorphous horror above me. "Watch out," I yelled triumphantly. "Serial killer coming through!" Particles of food sprayed over the shelving. There was a thundering noise behind me from the direction of the meat counter. A blood-red mass of raw meat had combined together. Joints, chopped sausages, and many slices of bacon. It was the shape of an extraordinary farm animal, and it raced across the supermarket straight at me. I fended it off with the broom as it charged past. Another spectral trail swirled around it, visible only through the spectacles. No sooner had it passed than the air was filled with a clanging shower of cans. I joined the other terrified shoppers as we cowered from the tumbling tins in what shelter we could find beneath the pallets or shelves. Multicoloured toilet rolls unfurled in the air like thick mad streamers. I slipped down the confectionery aisle. Shelves emptied to the accompaniment of the crinkling scratching sound of shredded tinfoil. Two figures blocked my progress, grotesque parodies of people made from half-melted blocks of chocolate. I backed away. Through a gap in the display racks, I could see that Clyde had reached the exit and stepped outside. At once, every particle of the cereal monster dropped like a settling sandstorm. Tin cans no longer hovered impossibly in the air, but thudded to the tiled floor. The peculiar beast collapsed in a heap of raw meats as though it had been shot. The confectionery creatures slumped down in a molten pool, and the air was full of the warm brown smell of freshly cooked chocolate. If Clyde had been confronted by that particular monster, I thought, he'd have threatened to eat it to death. Clyde? Where was he now? I could no longer see him. All around me I could hear whimpers and sobs. The tannoy made its bing-bong noise, and a nasal announcement declared, "Clean up on aisles 14, 15 and 16. I nearly jumped out of my skin when my handbag began to vibrate. This time it really was my mobile. I hadn't realised that I'd been holding my breath. When I did exhale, it was a mixture of relief and exhaustion and exasperation. I didn't recognise the caller ID on my phone's display. "Yes?" I asked. "Oh, hello, Miss Smith," asked a well-spoken English voice. "Sarah Jane Smith, yes?" I was walking to the exit of the supermarket in pursuit of Clyde. "Will this take long? I'm a little occupied at the moment." "This is Dr. Gwendolen Minot at the museum." I felt a chill run through me. "Can you get here straight away, please, Miss Smith?" continued Dr. Minot. "There's a problem with your son, Luke." Dr. Minot had my mobile number in case of emergencies during Luke's work placement. Luke was at the Natural History Museum. Dr. Minot wouldn't say what the problem was. She sounded reluctant, even a little awkward, and she asked me to get there as soon as possible. Driving in town on a weekday is murder, so the museum's easy to reach by tube. I sometimes travel by underground instead of driving if I need time to think. On this journey to the museum, I wished I could just stop worrying about Luke. Yes, I know. Most mums of 14-year-olds might be glad to see their child gaining independence. Maybe it was because I'd only rescued Luke from the Bane so very recently, because he'd really only lived for a year, that I was reluctant to let him go so soon. Or maybe all mums secretly feel that way and just don't let on. Anyway, I thought that Luke would enjoy his work experience at the Natural History Museum. He'd originally wanted to work at the Science Museum, and I dreaded the thought that he'd spend all his time correcting the exhibits or showing up the curators. He wouldn't do that to make a point or show off, but just because he thought he was right, which he almost invariably was. As it was, Luke was delighted to assist with cataloguing items, constructing displays, and helping in the shop. I know what an inspiring place the Natural History Museum is from many visits with my Aunt Lavinia when I was a girl, so my heart lifted every evening when Luke came home with stories of what he'd seen that day. Amazing animal exhibits, surprising new facts about the natural world, stories about eccentric research staff getting lost in the building, or the latest antics of naughty school kids on their tour. So it was a shock to learn from Dr. Minart's phone call that it was Luke who was the naughty school kid today. The front desk said I was expected, and they would let Dr. Minart know I'd arrived. While I waited, I read a brochure about a new exhibit, Animal Mummies of Ancient Egypt. Then I admired the vaulted interior of the main hall, the frescoes and sculptures, and the magnificent life-size cast from a Diplodocus skeleton. I recognised the familiar buzz from my own childhood visits. I craned my neck to look up at an overhead gallery where I remembered seeing a slice from the trunk of a giant sequoia tree. It was 1,300 years old when it was felled, and dates were marked against the rings in the cross-section. The start of Islam, the decline of the Mayan civilization, the rise of the Mongols under Kublai Khan. The tree was already 1,000 years old when Shakespeare and Galileo were born. Aunt Lavinia had joked that even she wasn't that old. How would she have felt if she'd known I'd travelled back in time to see some of those events? As I gazed up at the sequoia, another familiar old figure walked in front of it. Only for a couple of seconds, but distinctly recognisable as my cranky neighbour, Mr. Ploughman. What was he doing here? I retrieved his black-framed spectacles from my pocket, thinking I might return them to him. "Miss Smith?" asked a polite female voice beside me. I looked away briefly to acknowledge her. When I looked back up at the gallery, Mr. Ploughman had disappeared. I shook Dr. Minart's offered hand. She removed her half-moon spectacles and let them dangle on a golden chain around her neck. "Come this way, please." Dr. Minart guided me briskly through the cathedral-like interior of the main hall. "Oh, what's wrong?" I wanted to know. "I'm afraid your son caused a security incident, Miss Smith." Dr. Minart's voice was hushed, as though we were really in church. Though it's more likely because she just didn't want to embarrass me as we passed through the visitors milling around the giant dinosaur skeleton. Her voice belied the stern appearance of her black and white tweed suit and helmet of lacquered grey hair. I worried she was going to get more angry once we were away from the public areas, though I was even more worried about Luke. "What's wrong?" I repeated breathlessly as we negotiated a butterfly room, filled with row upon row of glass-fronted display cases. "What has Luke done? Is he all right? Is he hurt?" Dr. Minart paused by the largest display case. She looked into it before she answered me, studying the symmetrical shapes of moths and butterflies in browns and blues and bright yellows. Was she looking for inspiration or uncomfortable about meeting my eye? Eventually, she put her spectacles back on and did look at me. "Luke's such a lovely boy," she began almost apologetically. "Is he all right?" I insisted. "He removed a valuable item from one of the exhibits." She sighed in disbelief. "The Black Diamond of Urnfield." I told her that I couldn't believe it. There must be some mistake. "This isn't some trinket, you know, Miss Smith," snapped Dr. Minart, her temper flaring briefly. "It's unique, it's huge, 82 carats, utterly irreplaceable." I tried to stay calm, though I could feel a jumble of confusion and panic rising inside me. What happened? "He was supposed to be helping one of our curators set up the exhibit." Dr. Minart beckoned me through to another area of the museum. "But Luke reached into the display, snatched the diamond and fled. Now he's locked himself in a storage cupboard and refuses to come out." As we turned one corner, a grubby figure was just disappearing around the next. I knew the tales of that grubby raincoat. It was Mr. Ploughman again. I was still clutching his spectacles in my hand. I held them up to my eyes Wispy lines snaked around the exhibit cases, and vaporous whirls and spirals appeared to envelop the room, just as they had in the supermarket. When I removed the glasses, the foggy clouds vanished. I couldn't pursue Mr. Ploughman, as Dr. Minot had led me into a side room. This was the gallery where the Animal Mummies of Ancient Egypt exhibit was set up. How unexpected it was to see mummified birds, a cat-shaped sarcophagus, several bandaged baboons, even a preserved crocodile, though I know from my own adventures that the most unlikely things can be concealed inside a mummy's bindings. There was no time to look closer at the exhibit. A small group of angry-looking museum staff in brown coats were pacing before a thick, wood-panelled door, flanked by a couple of security guards. "Luke ran up here and locked himself in that cleaning closet," explained Dr. Minot. "There's no way out from there, so I decided it would be better if a relative talked him out of this madness." I hurried to the cupboard door and dismissed the security guards with an impatient wave of my hand. "He's a teenage boy, not an armed robber," I told them irritably. "This is just some misunderstanding, I'm sure. Don't crowd around the door. Let me deal with him quietly." Once they'd backed off, I could cover my use of the sonic lipstick and break in. I slipped into the cupboard and locked the door behind me. The place smelled of disinfectant and damp mops. Luke had pressed himself into one corner of the cramped space. My tousle-haired boy was huddled beneath a bowed shelf of cleaning materials, his knees pulled up towards him. He stared at something in his hands. It glowed in the meagre light of the room's bare bulb. I shuffled over and hunkered down beside him in the stuffy, claustrophobic room. "Luke, are you all right?" I slipped one arm around my son and pulled him to me. He resisted, the way that teenagers do when their mum makes them self-conscious. I could feel him trembling a little too, or maybe that was me. Luke stared into his cupped hands. "Look, Mum, it's the haunted black diamond of Urnfield, sometimes called the Dark Ghost." He was almost whispering, but still with that intense enthusiasm I recognised from when he talked at home about the museum. "I was drawn to it. I just couldn't leave it where it was." "I think they need it back, Luke." He didn't seem to hear me. "Look at those curious etchings. This jewel is shrouded in mystery. It was allegedly stolen from a mid-14th century temple. A curse has passed down to haunt anyone who's owned it." There was a rapping at the door and a muffled shout. "Hang on," I called back, the sound unnaturally loud in the tiny space. I lowered my voice to speak to Luke. "The museum staff want to curse you for taking that diamond, Luke." I tried to keep my voice light to hide my concern, though I couldn't help but ask, "What were you thinking?" He looked at me at last, and light shone in his blue eyes. "I was thinking that this is no ordinary diamond." "That's true from what Dr. Minot was telling me. You know she's worried about you, Luke." I smiled reassuringly. "So am I." He gave me his most earnest look. "I've done my research, Mum. Do you know how rare true black diamonds like this are? Only 1 in every 10,000 diamonds mined are coloured. And most of those get their colour from chemical impurities or defects in the stone itself. But black diamonds are different. Their colour comes from the presence of tiny mineral inclusions." He raised his hand so that I could see. Somewhere nearby I could hear a buzzing, and even in the poor light I could make out a shadowy fire at the jewel's heart. It was unlike any diamond I had ever seen. A dark gunmetal colour with striations running through it. Black diamonds contain iron oxide mineral, magnetite and hematite. Luke's voice sounded more distant now. "Sometimes they occur in such a high proportion that the diamond is magnetic." I placed my hand on Luke's forearm. "Why did you take the jewel?" He swapped the diamond into his right palm and turned over his other arm. "Because it does this." The fingers on his watch whizzed around the dial at a ridiculous speed, just like Clyde's watch. "That's not magnetism," I told him. When I looked more closely at the diamond, I saw that the striations were not irregular impurities in the gem. They were too precise, too much like... Yes, like the markings on that cube thing Clyde found in the supermarket freezer cabinet. I tried to examine the jewel with my wrist scanner, but its dial was going haywire. There was a fresh knocking at the door. "All right," I muttered, but my thoughts were still with Luke, making the connection with Clyde. And now that I'd made that connection, I knew what that buzzing sound was. It was my sonic lipstick, humming and vibrating in sympathy somewhere in my bag. I reached for the diamond, but Luke closed his fingers tightly over the jewel. I studied his face for a reaction, but there was no light in his eyes now. It was as though covering the diamond had robbed them of their natural sparkle. Luke's face had the same blank expression I'd seen on Clyde. Another thump, a much heavier blow this time. It sounded like someone was taking an axe to the door. "Come on, Luke," I told him brightly. "Let's go and explain about this dark ghost of yours." I helped him to his feet, ruffling his hair as I prevented his head from bumping the overloaded shelf. Luke struggled upright, using only his free hand to push himself off the floor. I took that hand and squeezed it affectionately. Then I used my sonic lipstick on the lock and opened the door. Opened it to a scene of chaos. The two security guards sprawled unconscious on the floor. The last of those big thumps on the door must have been when one of them fell against it. A stiff breeze blew around the gallery, whipping dust and papers around, lifting the brown coattails of the museum staff as they battled to remain on their feet. Dr. Minot shouted furiously at a little man in front of her. The little man was Mr. Plowman. His thin grey hair swirled in the breeze. I swiftly pulled out the black-framed glasses and put them on. They revealed great swirls of grey mist wreathing and undulating about the pensioner, invisible to everyone but me. I glanced aside to ensure that Luke was all right. He shook his hand free and dashed past me into the pandemonium of the gallery. Mr. Plowman hissed with fury, and the grey strands around him coiled angrily towards Luke. Luke raised his hand, brandishing the black diamond. At once, the mummified animals in the nearby exhibit jerked into life. Birds of prey, bound in rags, impossibly took flight and surrounded Mr. Plowman. He batted them away. But by then, the mummified crocodile had slid off its stand and across the floor and was struggling in its bindings as though desperate to snap at the pensioner's ankles. A mummified baboon stalked spasmodically over the polished museum floor. Its shambling gait reminded me of those alien mummies I'd seen long ago in a previous life. The baboon's fragile bandages unravelled behind it. Dr. Minot staggered back. Mr. Plowman shouted in anger and sidestepped the staggering creature as he searched for Luke. But Luke was already disappearing into the next gallery. As he vanished through the archway, the animated mummies yanked themselves into the air, gave one last twitch, and collapsed to the floor. Heaps of tattered bandages lay strewn across the gallery like piles of clothes abandoned in a teenage boy's bedroom. I've seen plenty of those too, believe me. The security staff seemed to be recovering and rose groggily to their feet. Dr. Minot gesticulated in the direction of the next gallery, and the guards lumbered off in pursuit of Luke. I hurried in their wake, wondering if I might delay or distract them and reach Luke first. I could hear the sound of glass shattering in the next gallery. So it wasn't me who distracted the guards. The broken glass was in the butterfly displays. A tornado of reanimated insect life was swarming out of the shattered cases. They drew together in the middle of the gallery, swirling and twisting and coalescing into a dense, grotesque humanoid shape that leered down at the shocked security staff. Mr. Plowman was forced backwards and fled up the stairs at the other side of the gallery. The massive creature made no sound, save for the noise of thousands upon thousands of insect wings beating together in the air. The huge head swung from side to side as it surveyed the tiny humans beneath it. One of the guards ventured bravely forward and was enveloped in one huge extended limb. He tore himself from its grasp, coughing and spluttering, spitting out fragments of dead insects as he whooped for breath. Luke was nowhere to be seen. I knew from the layout of the museum where he must be headed, and my heart sank. He would be running into the main hall where he would find the dinosaur skeleton. While the security guards battered helplessly at the insect monster, I skirted around it and hastened down the stairs. Behind me, I heard a sighing, rustling sound as the creature sank to the floor in a huge heap of inanimate dead insects. From the stairs, I saw Luke running to the museum exit. He held the black diamond aloft like a trophy. With Mr. Plowman's spectacles on, I could see grey wisps streaming from Luke's raised hand, swirling across the huge room and encircling the huge Diplodocus. Just as two brown-coated museum staff had almost reached Luke, the dinosaur skeleton behind them shimmered, shivered, and exploded into its constituent parts. Museum visitors fled to the sides of the room in panic. The Diplodocus's ribcage flew forwards and dropped on top of the two terrified staff members, and other bones dropped into place around it. The men were trapped, the ribcage now a real cage. I raced down the steps and across the hallway. The foggy trails in the room were too distracting, so I removed the spectacles, and the grey strands simply vanished before my eyes. Two scared receptionists sprang from their desk to gape incredulously at the scene, and I had to slip between them for the exit. Despite the turmoil in the museum, I was out into the street in less than a minute. Nevertheless, there was absolutely no sign of Luke. He and the Black Diamond had utterly disappeared into the hurly-burly of London. From back in the museum came the rattling sound of dinosaur bones as they clattered to the museum floor. I hurried away into the midweek throng of pedestrians, determined to avoid a further confrontation with Dr. Minot. I had to return home to Ealing. I knew I had to get help. I needed Mr. Smith. I got the tube back to Betterworth to retrieve my car. I sneaked into the car park, avoiding the ambulances and fire tenders that drew up outside the supermarket for an emergency none of them properly understood. I kept a low profile, just in case any of the staff remembered me and decided to point me out to the police. I couldn't afford a delay. I had to find out what was happening to Luke and Clyde. So the last person I wanted to bump into back in Bannerman Road right now was my new neighbour, Geeta Chandra. Geeta runs a local flower shop. Blooming Lovely, her business is called. But I once joked to Luke that she's sometimes more of a blooming nuisance. Oh, she's lovely, really, but is one of those over-eager neighbours who wants to be cheery, but ends up just wearing me down with her persistently ill-timed interruptions. It's one thing to be disrupted when I'm in the middle of the weekly wash or writing a magazine article, but it's quite another thing if I'm hiding a stranded alien in my back garden or trying to persuade an intergalactic fleet to take the long way round the Milky Way instead of buzzing straight past the Earth. Geeta bustled over from her driveway as soon as my car pulled up. "Oh, you should have been here earlier, Sarah." "Sarah Jane," I corrected her and groaned. I should have pretended I'd not seen her, but now we were having a conversation. "I'm in a bit of a rush," I added lamely. "I know what you mean, Sarah," continued Geeta relentlessly. "I barely had time to pop home for my lunch break. I've been non-stop all morning. You'd think with the kids out from under our feet we might get a bit of peace and quiet, but you can never really escape them, can you?" I hope Geeta wasn't going to start recording her daughter's toddler years again. That always made me feel awkward, because I have no experience of the same thing with Luke. "Madness," laughed Geeta. "I'd brought home a gorgeous flower arrangement for the living room and was making myself a cup and a sandwich when there was this big gust of wind from nowhere. I must have left the back door open because it just seemed to blast through the house. Knocked all my cups off the mug tray and practically emptied the dresser, and it ruined my floral arrangement. There were lilies and astromera blown all over the place, on the carpet, onto the new suite. And pollen from lilies is such a persistent stain." Geeta had barely drawn breath. Behind her in the doorway of her house I saw her teenage daughter. Rani is a friend of Luke's, and already a member of my young team of brave adventurers. "Hello, Rani," I called to her in the hope of stemming the torrent of words from Geeta. "I thought you were doing work experience this week." Rani hurried down the drive to join us. "That's right, and I'm so grateful, Sarah Jane." "Oh, thank you for agreeing to this," beamed Geeta. "I knew you'd be able to help." I had no idea what they were both talking about, but allowed Rani to grab my elbow and steer me away from her mum. "Look at the time! Shouldn't you be back at the shop by now?" she called back to Geeta as we hurried up the driveway. "Catch you later, Mum." My front door clicked shut and I stared at Rani. "I thought you were doing work experience at school." Because her family had moved into the area so recently, Rani hadn't arranged a placement with a local firm, so had reluctantly ended up working with her father, Haresh, who was head teacher at her new school. Rani wanted to be a journalist, and her mum had dropped many unsubtle hints that I should ask Rani to do her work experience with me. I was politely but firmly refused. Besides, the kind of work experience that Rani and Clyde and Luke already got with me had very little to do with journalism. "What's going on?" I asked. "I came home for lunch," explained Rani. "I was just closing our front door when I saw that old guy from number 23 nosing about outside your house." "Mr. Plowman?" I gasped. "Yeah, I thought he must have been pestering Luke to do his shopping as usual. I shouted to him that Luke was away in town and Mr. Plowman turned and waved. Well, I thought he was waving, but then there was this huge rush of air and things began to fly round our house. Mum's flowers in the living room just jumped right out of their vases." Rani's eyes were popping in amazement at the memory. "It was like they were forming the shape of a huge face, Sarah Jane, staring at me, threatening me. I ran back into the hallway and the front door slammed, and everything just dropped to the carpet like nothing had happened." I put my arm round her shoulders. "Let's go and see Mr. Smith." As we went upstairs to the attic room, I explained to Rani about the events of my morning. Clyde at the supermarket, Luke in the museum, and the mysterious involvement of our neighbour, Mr. Ploughman. I showed the pensioner's strange black-rimmed spectacles to Rani. "Spectral specs? Way cool!" she giggled and tried them on. "Oh," she added in disappointment as she looked round the attic. "Everything looks normal." "That's a relief," I said, and walked over to the far wall. "Mr. Smith, I need you." The brick chimney breast parted with a sigh of hydraulics and the grinding of gears as Mr. Smith unfolded into the room. The accompanying haze of steam made me think of the spectral trails that had surrounded Mr. Ploughman earlier, and the accompanying musical fanfare showed how pleased my computer was to assist me as usual. "Hello, Sarah Jane," said Mr. Smith's calm voice. "How can I help you?" I signalled that Rani should put the spectacles in the computer's scanning tray. "Mr. Smith, these appear to have extraterrestrial properties. What is their origin?" Mr. Smith's crystalline display screen rotated and sparkled. "They are artifacts from the planet Persepolis. Construction tools." Rani retrieved the glasses and popped them on. She threw a cheeky hand into the air and blinked behind the lenses like the school SWAT asking a question. "Oh, please, sir, what sort of construction tools?" Mr. Smith remained unimpressed. "The Persepolisians use them when they're building things. The lenses reveal the manipulating force fields used during building work on that planet." "Oh!" I clapped my hands together with delight. "Those ghostly strands! Someone or something must be using the same force field here on Earth, in the supermarket and in the museum. And in my living room," gasped Rani. "Yes, they form objects into guard dogs. Creatures constructed from whatever is around, food, museum displays, even flowers." I stared at Mr. Smith's flickering display and pondered the implications. "But what is creating those force fields?" "And why?" asked Rani. "You only need a guard dog if there's something to guard. Like that diamond you said Luke nicked. That Luke had?" "And the dice-shaped thing Clyde retrieved from the freezer," I agreed, and described the items to Mr. Smith. "Cross-reference that with Persepolis." Mr. Smith was ahead of me. Already his screen showed rotating images of 3 items. One was a cloudy jewel, another was a small cube, and the third was like a small tea tray, etched with the same curious marks as the other items. "These are the 3 components of a Persepolisian control console. The jewel and the cube fit into the base unit." I stepped closer to get a better look at the rotating images. "How could these have reached Earth?" Mr. Smith hummed and whirred. "I have scanned historical accounts for Persepolisian contact with your planet, Sarah Jane. The last record is when one of their ships disintegrated after an orbital collision in 1066. "Battle of Hastings," declared Rani, and immediately lowered her eyes. "Sorry, history's my favourite subject." "Nothing to be ashamed of," I smiled. "And 1066 is also a year when Halley's Comet appeared. Maybe that was the collision. What happened, Mr. Smith?" "Evidence is vague at this distance. The console will have separated as it fell to Earth. In the event of loss over a primitive planet, such an enormously powerful device could not be allowed to fall into the hands of the native population. It would disperse, conceal and protect its components until a Persepolisian could retrieve them." "Hey!" grinned Rani. "Underground treasure! Like a time capsule. We buried one of those at my last school." Mr. Smith hummed with satisfaction. "And any innocent minds coming into close contact with the reactivated components would be controlled by them, used by the devices for self-protection." "Luke and Clyde!" I breathed. "That's why they took the items. Something else has control of Mr. Ploughman, and he is pursuing them." I pointed to the tray-like device on Mr. Smith's screen. "So where is that third component? The base unit?" "Impossible to say," apologised Mr. Smith. Rani paced fretfully up and down in the attic room. The thick glasses made her look older than her 15 years. She stopped by the attic window and peeped out through the coloured glass. "Wow!" she said slowly. She handed the spectacles to me and pointed. "Look! You can see a line of grey smoke going down the street." "It's Mr. Ploughman!" I shouted in delight. "Without realising it, he's left us a trail." We threw ourselves downstairs and out to my car. I asked Rani to wear the spectacles and provide directions. I wanted to concentrate on the road, not get dangerously distracted by the ethereal energy trail left by Mr. Ploughman. "Left here," yelled Rani, and we squealed around a corner. "Oh, yes," she shouted. "Another trail! That means one of the boys must have come this way too." I'd worked out where he was headed. "That's out towards the river," I said. "Nothing much there, just warehouses and loading yards." I swerved around a couple of parked cars. "Whoa!" Rani begged. "Watch where you're driving." "Cheeky girl," I told her. "Sorry," laughed Rani. "I must sound like my mum when my dad's driving." "Harash, think of our no claims bonus." I chuckled to myself. The things that have happened to my car. Well, let's just say that the details on my insurance claims aren't entirely truthful. Rani let out another whoop. "There's a third trail leading down that road there, and they're getting more solid. Does that mean they're more recent?" "I think so," I said, gripping the wheel tightly, desperate to see Luke again and see if he was all right. The 3 trails crisscrossed between side roads. Clyde, Luke, and Mr. Ploughman had taken different routes and different times, but they were gradually heading for the same destination. I pulled over beside a road sign for Khartoum Street. "There's an A to Z in the glove compartment," I told Rani. "Let's see where those trails are converging." Rani located the correct page, and we traced the directions with our fingers. "Lodwick Scrapyard," we both chorused. I put the car into gear, and we roared off down the street. At the penultimate corner, we drove past Mr. Ploughman, who was making methodical progress along the pavement. Rani pointed, but I told her to ignore him. We had a chance of reaching the scrapyard first and beating him to that third Persepolisian component. I pulled up in front of the scrapyard gates. They were padlocked shut. A crudely drawn sign hanging on them declared, "Closed today due to family illness." Breaking in was easy enough with a sonic lipstick. The unattended scrapyard was eerily silent. I shivered as I looked around. Massed piles of trash towered to either side of us like metal mountains tall as houses. Fridges stuck out at odd angles. 2 large container skips brimmed over with metal cans of different sizes. Further along was a tottering pile of junked cars. They were stacked beside a gigantic crusher that was ready to squeeze each vehicle down into a dense, compacted cube of compressed metal. A ladder led up the crusher's side to an operator's control cabin. Rani peered through the old-fashioned spectacles. "No sign of any smoke trails," she told me. "We got here first." I used my wrist scanner to search the area. Sure enough, I got a trace of an alien artifact. The signal came from beyond the gigantic crushing machine. After clambering carefully between several car chassis, I narrowed it down to the boot of a rusty Ford Zephyr balanced precariously atop the burnt-out shell of another vehicle. The lid popped open with a rusty groan. In the filthy matting of the car's boot was the tray-like device I'd seen on Mr. Smith's screen. The base unit. "Careful," I warned Rani. She handed me the spectacles so both her hands were free to retrieve the device. She held it reverently in front of her. "Well done, Rani," I said. When she didn't reply, I knew something was wrong. Her face was blank and impassive. "Well done, indeed," shouted a mocking new voice. Striding through the main area of the scrapyard was Mr. Ploughman, easily making his way along a stretch of bent railings and over a tangled pile of wrecked lawnmowers. No sign of a war wound there, I noted. Then my heart lurched. Trailing behind him were Luke and Clyde, their faces as inexpressive as Rani's. Luke appeared exhausted after his long walk, and Clyde still looked damp from being in the supermarket freezer. Rani began to climb back down to the scrapyard. I slithered over a car bonnet and managed to catch her just as she came round the corner of the big car crusher. I held her gently by one arm to stop her joining the others. "You're obviously not Mr. Ploughman," I called out to the old man. "Who are you?" "I am Janxia." His tone was booming and confident, quite unlike an old man's voice. "A Persepolisian, I presume." "You know my race," he cackled in a way I'd never heard my neighbour laugh. "I fell to Earth 1,000 years ago. My ship collided with debris from a comet. When it was clear I could not control the crash landing, the automatic system scattered key components to the planet's surface, including my life pod. What have you done to Mr. Ploughman?" Another cackle from Janxia. "He stumbled across my dormant life pod in the construction site behind his house. I would have preferred a stronger host. One of the site workers, perhaps, but the emergency system bonded on first contact, so... He held out both hands as if to say, "Well, here I am." I looked worriedly at the boys flanking him. "Jangxia, you're a parasite."
Well, symbiote is a more polite term," he replied. "But I have no time to argue terminology with you, Miss Smith. I have what I need to effect my escape from this miserable planet. After 1,000 years of stasis, I was too weak to override the protective systems of these components. Fortunately, I was able to use these children to handle that for me."
"The components have overpowered the children," I said.
"To begin with," admitted Jangxia, "the components were long buried. They're designed to resist attempts to retrieve them, but I've grown stronger, reasserted my control over them, and they're young human carriers."
He beckoned to the children. Luke held out the black diamond in his palm, and Clyde offered up the cube-shaped device. I felt Rani tug as she tried to move, but I continued to hold her firmly by the arm. "Jangxia, these components combine into an enormously powerful device. You can't use it here. You'll destroy southern England." He looked at me coldly.
"What do I care? The reconstructed transport device can return me to Persepolis."
"Let me help you," I pleaded with him. "I have contacts, friends who can get you to a safer launch point, a deserted island far from populated areas maybe, or a space launch, or the surface of the moon." Jangxia uttered that cruel laugh again.
"I won't delay my departure."
"Then I'll stop you," I said firmly. I raised my hand and activated the sonic lipstick. The alien components affected it, so I was hoping the reverse was also true. I saw the cube begin to vibrate in Clyde's hand. The diamond was causing Luke's arm to quiver too. At my side, Rani shook as the base unit began to feel the sonic effects. Jangxia let out a huge roar that belied his frail appearance.
"I control these children, and I shall control you too."
A cold thrill ran through me as Jangxia began to channel the power of the alien components onto me. Lights began to sparkle before my eyes, and a numbing sensation spread slowly through my limbs. I couldn't grip the sonic lipstick properly. It slipped from my grasp and rattled off into the nearest pile of junk metal. I stared in despair at the blank, uncomprehending faces of the children. It was as though Luke no longer recognized me, and my heart wanted to break. But no! I recognized that puzzled expression that appeared on Luke's face. He managed to snap his head back and shout, "Leave my mum alone!" Jangxia must have overstretched himself. Rani was the next to stumble free from his influence, and then Clyde. Finally, the outline of Mr. Ploughman's body blurred and smeared. I shoved the black-rimmed spectacles to my face and saw that the pensioner's body was surrounded by a gassy haze, almost as though he was on fire. These stringy lengths of fog came together to form a tall, thin shape beside him, and I knew I was looking at the true Persepolisian form of Jangxia. Mr. Ploughman blinked rapidly in confusion. When he saw the pale, emaciated alien beside him, he fainted to the ground. Jangxia stretched out one skinny arm and plucked the cube-shaped component from the astonished Clyde. The alien manipulated the device dexterously in his bony fingers. There was a clattering sound of metal. For a dreadful moment, I thought that one of the container skips was being emptied over us. I whirled around, almost falling into a car chassis, terrified that any sudden movement might overbalance the stacked cars. It was worse than that. A looming, humanoid figure, 9 meters high, formed a stark silhouette against the early afternoon sun. Its torso was the half-crushed remains of an old Mini, and its head was a dented green filing cabinet. The limbs were fashioned from bent stretches of metal guttering. The monster stalked into combat on its impossibly spindly legs, a ghastly parody of Jangxia, rearing up, ready to crush me. Luke scampered up a knotted tangle of metal cables, brandishing the black diamond high above his head. With a deafening cacophony, a heap of old kitchen equipment sprang into the air. A rusty microwave, a battered collection of toasters, the dented remains of pans and pressure cookers, and a jingling assortment of old cutlery that hovered improbably overhead. They shaped themselves into another giant creature, stomping across to confront Jangxia's monster. I dragged Mr. Ploughman's unconscious body out of the creature's paths. "Run!" I yelled at Rani and Clyde. They fled, clawing their way up the ladder to the relative safety of the giant car crusher's control cabin.
The new monster raised its arms, spiked and angled with spoons and forks and ladles, ready to strike out at its opponent. But Janxia's creature smashed that limb aside with a length of metal guttering. The arm of Luke's creature shattered at once. We all ducked as knives and forks flashed through the air. Another blow from Janxia's creature smashed into the legs, and Luke's champion crumpled helplessly into a random pile of kitchenware. But now a third metal creature stalked into battle. This one was formed from an uncountable number of metal cans that sprang in a torrent out of the nearest huge skip. Some glittered silver in the afternoon light, others were rusted and had scraps of labels still clinging to their outsides. A brave figure stood insolently on top of the control cabin, urging her creature into battle by using the tray-shaped alien base unit. "Rani!" I shouted, half in delight, half in terror for her safety. Janxia was expert with these devices, though. His spindly monster swiped out savagely twice, and Rani's creature exploded into a shower of razor-edged tin cans that scattered over the adjacent heap of cars like a sudden downpour of fat silver raindrops. Janxia's creature dominated the scrapyard. It lurched menacingly towards us. "Luke, here!" yelled Clyde. "Rani, throw it in!" I saw that Clyde had slipped into the driving seat of the car crusher. Rani was still atop the cabin and cast the Pasopolesium base unit right into the pit of the machine. Luke recognised what to do. He hefted the black diamond in his palm, judged its weight, and threw it underarm. It arced through the air towards the crusher. For a moment I thought he'd missed. The fat jewel bobbled on the metal edge, then dropped between the crusher's open jaws. Clyde let out a great shout of laughter and punched at the starter button. The huge machine coughed and spluttered and fired into life. The enormous pistons either side of it began to close. Clyde climbed back out onto the roof to survey his handiwork, hugging Rani as they danced with delight at their cleverness. Janxia screamed with anger. His skeletal frame scuttled over the scrapyard and up the tottering pile of cars. "No! Without those devices, I will never get home!" he roared. As he reached the top of the pile, the precariously balanced Ford Zephyr wobbled. Even Janxia's slight weight was enough to tip it. With a rending squeal of tortured metal, the crumpled vehicle dropped into the maw of the crusher, taking Janxia with it. Clyde's eyes widened. He scrambled over to the crusher controls, stabbing desperately at the buttons to deactivate the machine. But it was too late. The crusher's sides continued their inexorable movement, mangling the contents together, car, alien components, and Janxia alike. Clyde and Rani clambered down the ladder carefully. Both looked shell-shocked. "I tried to turn it off. Couldn't get to it in time," babbled Clyde. "There was nothing you could do, Clyde," I told him gently. "Nothing any of us could do. We couldn't save him. There just wasn't time. It wasn't your fault." I put an arm round his shoulders. "Those monsters were terrifying," Rani mumbled. "Nah," grinned Clyde. "They was rubbish, man." He pulled away from me, pretending to be his usual cool self again. There was a fresh clattering behind him. Clyde gave a little squeal of horror that undid all his coolness in an instant, but it was only Luke, stumbling over some old dustbin lids to join us. Rani burst out laughing. I gathered the three of them up into a big hug, so glad they were all safe. With a bit of a squeeze, we all fitted into my car so that I could drive everyone home. The kids managed to cram together in the back, while poor old Mr. Ploughman, bemused and befuddled, dozed in the passenger seat. I dropped Clyde at his home for a warm bath. Then Luke and Rani helped me return Mr. Ploughman to his house in Bannerman Road, and we put him in his favourite armchair. He woke up with a start just as we were all leaving. Luke explained to him that he must have been having a horrible dream. "Can I get you anything?" he asked Mr. Ploughman. "A cup of tea, perhaps?" "Well, there is something," the old man quavered. He reached into his pocket for a grubby scrap of paper and peered at it myopically. "I think I must have misplaced my specs." He smoothed out the scrap to reveal an untidy shopping list, then fixed Luke with a rheumy eye. "You couldn't pop down to Betterworth's for me, could you, lad? Just need a few items." He slapped his left leg. "I'd do it myself if it wasn't for this old war wound." I groaned and sneaked out with Rani before he gave us a Betterworth's shopping list too. "Oh, yes, Betterworth's. That reminds me. Clyde's abrupt departure earned him a lifetime ban from the supermarket.
I don't think he's much bothered about going shopping, I should add, let alone working there again. The museum was harder to work around. Dr. Minot was relieved at the return of the Black Diamond, or at least a duplicate cleverly created by Mr. Smith, and she was delighted when I gave her another extraordinary alien jewel for the museum collection. It was a gift to me from a rescued Kizami, and the museum may keep it so long as there is no more fuss about Luke. But then again, the museum staff could hardly explain the chaos in their own exhibition space, let alone blame a 14-year-old boy for it. I don't think I'll miss that Kizami souvenir. Well, I have a Persepolisian replacement for it in my own collection. In the safekeeping of Mr. Smith, of course. I found it in the scrapyard where Janksy had dropped it in his final desperate scramble to the crusher. It looks just like a strangely etched dice. You wouldn't think at first glance that it could be so dangerous. But as I told you, appearances can be deceptive. The Sarah Jane Adventures, The Time Capsule, was written by Peter Anghelides and was read by Elisabeth Sladen. It was produced by Kate Thomas and is published by BBC Audiobooks.